It's a big one today, ladies and gents, because the last time that Bitcoin did exactly what it's done right here, we saw a big price explosion. We actually set a brand new all-time high. So if you're excited for this one, do me a favor and smash up those likes if you are coming in. Double check, of course, that you are subscribed. And a huge shout out to Bybit and 𝗙𝗟𝗟 linked in the description down below. It's two of the best exchanges in the game for sure. And 𝗙𝗟𝗟 is super cool because you can actually get exclusive chart setup updates from the team with, just for free. You just get more free stuff. So check it out if you're not from a restricted region. But bringing it back to the video here, look, so Bitcoin managed to get a breakout here. It might not look significant, but if we take a look at things on this chart right here, Bitcoin was trading inside of a downward trending parallel channel, and this thing was pointing toward the kind of mid 90s, but Bitcoin has actually managed to get a breakout from this point today on this daily candle. Now, there are still 6 hours left on this daily candle. There's still a lot that can go wrong and a lot that can change, but what we are seeing at the moment, ladies and gents, is honestly a repeat of what's happened before. So I'm just going to give you a quick spoiler before we go into things fully. Bitcoin did exactly this through 2024. Basically, this lasted for like 7-8 months, right? 240 days. And when Bitcoin did manage to get that pop, it resulted very quickly, within less than 2 months, it resulted in a 60% pump to the upside, okay? So if Bitcoin were to do the same thing again, even if it were to get up to 60%, we can't even fit this shit on the chart, you're looking at $170,000 BTC. So obviously a little bit extreme, but if you just take half of that, and we just kind of target 30%, that's still 140k. And these might seem like unrealistic price targets, but I don't actually think that's true. And again, like I said, we'll get to that a little bit later on in this video. Like I said, if you're hyped up for it, then do me a favor and smash up those lights. Let's actually change up these lights right here as well on this video. How's this? Is this a better... it's a little bit too dark. We'll just keep it where it was. And so really what I want to focus on before we talk about these macro price structures are, what's happened on a more micro kind of time scale. Bitcoin has, it's been trending lower. Like I said, we've been seeing lower highs and lower lows, right? Here's a couple of examples. Let's take a cleaner chart because it's a little bit confusing. So here are some of the highs that Bitcoin was setting, just overall kind of trending to the downside. Same with the lows over here. And that's why this price action that we're seeing today is significant, right? Because even as it stands right now, we're above the high from a few days ago, and we're above the high from mid-June. So that puts Bitcoin in a pretty interesting, strong place here to continue moving up. And of course, none of this matters if the S&P 500 is not healthy, but exactly as predicted, ladies and gents. Once again, huge shout out to those of you that have been staying tuned to this YouTube channel. One of the big things that you're going to learn as you consistently watch this channel is that we're essentially going to say the same things over and over again because, the market hasn't quite caught up to our analysis, and that's basically the natural kind of flow of this market, right? You're going to have an idea, you're going to say it, you're going to, maybe trade it, and then there's going to be a period of time that passes where you don't know if you're right or wrong, and then eventually the market's going to do what you were expecting, right? And that's been happening with us over and over and over since the lows of this market, which is absolutely sick. If you found it useful, do me a favor, just drop a comment, a like, whatever. Any engagement really helps the channel. But the S&P 500 here, we cannot be surprised at all. It has managed to set a new all-time high, and with a little bit of vigor, you know what I mean? Like, it's not gone slowly at all. It's definitely going pretty quick right now, and that I think is one of the key things that's actually bringing these markets to a really kind of healthy place to continue to move up right here. Here's Tesla stock, by the way, still sitting at 314. Obviously, there's been so much damage that people have tried to do on companies like Tesla, and also just a lot of shit that people have been talking, for indices like the S&P 500. Obviously, all of these people doing absolutely terribly. Just, I don't know where their heads are stuck. Clearly not looking straight or at what's in front of them. Perhaps too engrossed in group chats and media to have a straight mind. But it is what it is. At least we're not making those mistakes. And I think with the S&P 500 looking so strong and Bitcoin also, just a minor stone's throw away from its all-time high, I do feel like that does put Bitcoin in definitely quite a strong position to continue to move up from here. So one of the best things that we kind of want to see at a point like this now, especially if we look at this parallel channel, and by the way, Let's just very quickly recap how important this is. The most typical kind of pattern that you see on any stock or any asset is going to be this kind of ascending staircase where your steps are going to be kind of angled lower. Essentially, all this is saying is that the market is moving up, but then we kind of fight that trend a little bit. We consolidate. Whoever wants to distribute their Bitcoin and sell it will sell at this point. Whoever wants to accumulate will get a gradually better and better price level to sell it at. There is also something to be said about market manipulation, where I don't know if this is happening on Bitcoin right now, but for sure it's happened before, and for sure it's going to happen again. And it happened very famously with gold for 4 years, as we've spoken about on this channel, where you can definitely get whales kind of really pushing heavy sells at these highs, basically for no reason other than to allow Bitcoin, to allow the market to kind of soak in a little bit of fear, and then allow Bitcoin to kind of trend lower. And that's when the same people who sold heavy up here can kind of reaccumulate, and every time they get 20% more Bitcoin, let's say, which is a brilliant kind of accumulation strategy if you can manipulate markets, I guess. And of course, a bigger part of this is going to be that Bitcoin just kind of moves in tandem with the S&P 500. So, it's also entirely likely, I don't remember, but it's entirely likely that toward the end of May, we did see the S&P kind of drop a little bit there. So really, really nice kind of super bullish chart pattern that we actually love to see on these charts, because it's just, super healthy, really indicates quite solid upside. And, there's a few different ways that you can kind of measure how high this thing could go from here. Obviously, one of the ways that you can measure it is just going to be measuring the flagpole. Okay, imagine that we've got a flag. So we've got, here's the actual flag itself, and then this line would be the flagpole. And we can kind of extrapolate a target a little bit like this. And this also puts us, pretty close to that $140,000 target that we described toward the beginning of this video. This puts us at about 135, which is still absolutely great. It's a really, really nice price level to see Bitcoin at, and totally conceivable, totally believable to me. I think at this stage, there's so many people in this market that are just so burnt and, just so lost and upset and losing their minds, essentially, for lack of a better word. But really the market, if you just kind of step back and, essentially take your head out of your ass, this market's been pretty damn stable, this entire period. I mean, I know that it might seem, completely different. It might seem, especially if you're a more emotional trader, it might really feel like things have been pretty terrible for you. But again, I mean, we've said it countless times, and we're going to keep on saying it because it is 100% straight facts, ladies and gents. This entire trend has been characterized by up and then sideways, and then up. Bear with me, guys. And then and then up. And then more sideways, up, and in this case we kind of trended down a little bit. And this is definitely more of an exception. We kind of did something a little bit like this, but we're kind of, to me, it looks like we could just be doing the same thing again, right? And this is ultimately the point that I'm making is, Bitcoin really has been moving in a super stable kind of way this entire trend. I actually want to go ahead and remove all of these candles from the chart, and this is what we're left with. You know what I mean? Like we're left with a super clean, just the best. It's kind of the best thing that you could ask for as far as a kind of market pattern, right? Like this is as close to this as you're ever gonna get to in the real world. And if like I said, if your head's not stuck up your ass, then you'd actually see this as a pretty healthy chart. And believe me or not, it's up to you. I feel like a lot of people who are actually good at this, who do this for a living, who manage large amounts of money, I believe that they're viewing the charts like this. And the reason I believe that is because it's also what the S&P 500 is doing, and we understand that Bitcoin, like I said, moves in tandem with it. So, if those sharks or whatever you want to call them are kind of behaving like this, viewing the market like this, and so on and so forth, then to me, that makes this, quite obvious that, we're kind of in a super healthy, stable market. It's an interesting way to kind of change how you view the market, right? There's a lot of different ways you can do this, but this way, I think, is really useful if you can just map out the kind of rough shape of the chart and then take the chart off and just look at those lines. You'll really get a super sober perspective without your stupid emotional feelings that you may or may not have. ran out of breath there. You get to kind of take that out of the equation and see things for what they actually are. Okay, and really the only thing you can say about this that's negative, and it's not even true, is that this market moved too slowly. And the reason I say it's not true is that yes, where we did move up, 700% in 1,000 days, which is admittedly quite slow for Bitcoin. First of all, it's 700%, so I don't actually think it's that slow. But second of all, much more importantly, we already understood that Bitcoin as a market was getting tamed and changing. And I think that, a lot of people kind of forget about that when they start flaming Bitcoin for being too boring these days. By the way, I agree with you guys. Bitcoin is indeed boring, especially compared to how it used to be. But that doesn't mean the opportunities are gone. Very much the opposite. And like I said, that's something that we talk about a lot on 𝗙𝗟𝗟𝗪 with those exclusive kind of posts that we're able to make. It's very similar to the free Telegram channel that we've got here, but we're actually posting more exclusive stuff right here. So check that out. Really cool stuff that we're doing there for now, if you are interested. But like I said, of course, only if you're not from a restricted region. Bringing it back to the Bitcoin chart here, look, reasonable time frame. We understand that Bitcoin is kind of slowing down, getting tamed, and moving in tandem with traditional finance. So again, all of this stuff to me makes none of this surprising. And I think that's really good, right? We don't want to be surprised by the market if we can avoid it, because it means that we're probably not having great foresight, which is actually, of course, very common. But I think that that's important. And then let's head back to this Bitcoin chart right here, and let's talk a little bit more about this. Obviously, one of the ways that you can extrapolate a target is just going to be, measuring the flagpole and then putting that at the bottom, and then, you kind of get a target from there. Another way is, like I said, it's just looking at what we did previously, right? I mean, this was a 60% move, and it did result in, obviously quite a nice all-time high for Bitcoin. So that does put Bitcoin well above 150K if it does end up happening. And I think, what we've got to keep in mind is that as far as Bitcoin's chart goes, there is no more resistance, right? We're basically above all of these highs from, late 24, early 25. And we're also, just like I said, a stone's throw away from our actual all-time high at 112. So, it's not going to take a whole lot from this point to kind of send Bitcoin above that all-time high. But what's really important is this time, as we approach that all-time high, we're doing it coming out of a, arguably, like I said, in my opinion, kind of the best possible chart pattern that you could ever get on Bitcoin, which is, of course, a typical kind of descending channel that in this case has lasted for 40 days. So, we're moving out of a kind of short to mid-term consolidation range. We've already had a pullback after setting this all-time high, and this was a fairly sizable pull. I mean, it wasn't crazy, but it was a 32%. You know what I mean? I mean, that's definitely kind of mid to large-scale correction size, especially for Bitcoin. I mean, it depends on what kind of market cycle you're in, because Bitcoin can easily drop by 80% and, of course, stay safe, and we've seen it happen a million times. So, in that sense, this probably makes it kind of more of a mid-range correction, but that's bear market stuff, right? As far as a bull market goes, 32% is getting close to the top end of the kind of corrections that you expect. I don't really think that you're going to be expecting it to drop by more than 40%, certainly not more than 50%. So, it's a sizable correction that Bitcoin had. And then even after that correction, we entered another kind of range of corrective price action, which, by the way, Bitcoin's done this before. We had this entire kind of range moving down. And then when we moved up, we did still enter a small consolidation zone. Obviously, it looks so insignificant, but it's still something that happened. It still lasted 2 weeks, which is not too different. I mean, it's a big difference from 40 days, but it's still, kind of short to mid-range correction size, and obviously it resulted in something very bullish for Bitcoin. So, I think that we're actually looking pretty damn decent here. Here's another example where we're sideways here in this case for about 60 days, but as soon as we break out, we enter another 2-week corrective price range. So, super typical, super healthy for Bitcoin to go from one correction to another, especially if we do get that follow through, which it looks like is starting right now. And like I said, this is not a Bitcoin question. This is going to be an S&P 500 question. And given that the S&P is looking so strong, I'm actually quite optimistic about this. Obviously, I'd love to see a kind of back test to this all-time high, but we're not too far above this level yet, so ideally, we can see this thing getting a little bit higher before we come back down. And at this point, this probably could represent, let's say 130k down here, and then back down to 110, 105k down here for BTC, right? If Bitcoin were to move along the S&P 500 for that kind of price action. So I think that, we're looking pretty good from that perspective as well. We've gotten a pretty decent breakout here. Obviously, by percent, it's not huge. It's not even 2%, but I mean, it's a start. We're not kind of asking for miracles right now. Just as long as we can kind of hold above this level and continue to move up over the next couple of days, that's going to be great. That's going to be much more than I think we could reasonably ask for. We have seen Bitcoin's dominance set a new high as expected, but if we come forward a few days, it has now dropped by a tiny bit as well. To me, it looks like this thing is still trending higher. So, I'm definitely not going to be expecting anything to, change in any substantial or material way for Bitcoin's dominance, other than, it could potentially continue to go higher. Here's 𝗙𝗘𝗏, which is kind of just sitting at a floor right now, which is quite interesting. Solana, has kind of been through the ringer a little bit, kind of, a little bit of crazy price action to the downside, a little bit of crazy price action to the upside, and now back in the middle. I think a lot of these altcoins, here's XRP looking actually pretty decent, but I think a lot of these altcoins are, pretty much just waiting for something a little bit more clear to happen with BTC. And like I said, I think one of the biggest things right now is that if this thing is able to kind of get this breakout, it could really kind of stretch the market and pull it higher. I would probably anticipate that Bitcoin's dominance is gonna, kind of slow these things down from really getting crazy. I wouldn't imagine that, we're gonna get a big Bitcoin price move and then Ethereum and all the other coins, really skyrocket as well. I think they'll certainly move up, but probably in the shadow of Bitcoin, probably not as much as Bitcoin, at least not for now. We've got to see things kind of change as far as sentiment, and this is a big thing that we've been talking about for a long time on this YouTube channel now, is just how sentiment does need to get, quite a bit more positive, quite a bit, there needs to be a lot more FOMO, really, in order for things to kind of really take off. And, that's going to be something that we kind of just have to wait and see, as Bitcoin continues to progress through this bull market, because we're clearly not there yet, and that means that there isn't really an appetite to kind of take that risk on altcoins. But what I will say about that super quickly is that it's pretty quick to change that. Ultimately, all it takes is a little bit of greed. Bitcoin makes some money, everybody feels good, and then all of a sudden, some random shit coin starts pumping 10x or 100x, and then another one, and then another one, and then you've just been sidelined watching it for the last 2 weeks, and then on week 3 you enter, and now you're in an alt season, right? That's kind of how this tends to go. We've covered in depth on this channel before how it's not actually people that move prices, but it's prices that move people. So what happens is that perhaps through manipulation, or perhaps through a fat-fingered buy order, or whatever the case may be, you start to get some charts looking pretty primed. You start to get some charts looking pretty exciting. Those charts will entice people to enter the market. So it's the price moving people, not the other way around. And then you get that big knock-on effect where everybody starts speculating, and you're in a really nice alt season. But like I said, I don't think we're there yet. We need a little bit more optimism. We need people to be feeling good ultimately, right? Like, you're not going to take excess additional risk if you're already kind of shriveled up and tight, and you know what I mean, and not super happy with the way things are going. That's not the kind of environment where you take risk. But typically where it is where there's a little bit of greed, you feel a little bit arrogant, maybe, you made a little bit of profit, you feel like anything you touch turns to gold, maybe a little bit of that, maybe not, but obviously that's how it tends to go, just with kind of basic human psychology, and that's where we start to really open those doors for an alt season here. Now, as far as downside goes for Bitcoin, I mean, look, if we fall back down into this range, that would not be great. That would make this a fake out, and we're probably looking at targeting the bottom of this range. I think that at this point, if Bitcoin were to fall below, let's say 107, 106, that's probably gonna, it's probably gonna make the likelihood that Bitcoin falls below 100k. I think it's gonna make that likelihood quite high. And I'm simply saying that because, a drop below, 106, 107 puts us back in this range. And it's not been particularly strong to begin with. I mean, it's okay, but I mean, Bitcoin has kind of, pretty, I don't know. I don't want to say recklessly, but without much hassle, Bitcoin has been able to kind of drop below 100 already a few times. You know what I mean? So it feels like a very spongy level. If anything, typically you want really nice kind of support levels to tell you where things might go. I think that this is a really nice example as resistance, right? Where we got some pretty reliable rejections, but yeah, I mean, look, for the most part, we've been saying this for many months now. This entire range, kind of from 70 to 112, it's a very mushy range, especially from 90 to 112. There's just support and resistance at every at every $1,000 level. There is a good level. You know what I mean? So that doesn't really, create a chart that you can, analyze with much accuracy. But hey, that's okay, because it still means that we can kind of expect where support might happen. And that's why I said that, probably somewhere into the 90s. I wouldn't really expect things to get significantly worse. But of course, like I said, it is going to be a kind of S&P 500 question. We're just going to see we're going to have to see how traditional finance moves if Bitcoin were to do that. But, I wouldn't be too worried about it. I don't think it's the end of the world if Bitcoin does kind of end up falling back into this range. It's happened many times before. And obviously, the trend is completely fine. But like I said, this is the point where something could start happening from here. So that would obviously be quite exciting. One of the things that I'm always going to be open to is just the idea that Bitcoin might perhaps get a little bit higher than this and backtest this level and then blast off. Obviously, we've already covered how that happened previously with this example right here. Where we did get, what was this, a couple percentage points, 3.6, 3.7% above, which is really, really good. That's a pretty nice margin to clear a resistance level by. And then you get that nice back test, and then you're kind of off. We got another back test as well, which is great. Sometimes the market, only gives you one opportunity to buy a good level like that. But in this case, we got lucky and we got another one. So that was pretty cool right there. And so obviously, I'm super open to the same thing happening over here for Bitcoin. I would really like to see that. It's super healthy. And ultimately, one of the reasons that it's so good is that, it gives the bulls a little bit of a chance to take this thing higher, but then it puts the control back in the hands of the bears, which can be really concerning. But it actually turns into a great opportunity for the bulls again, because while the bears are kind of taking control of the market and sending this thing down by, let's say in this case, $4,000, that does give the bulls a really good opportunity to reject what the bears are doing. It gives them a chance to kind of buy back at potentially, the last chance, at least for some time, at your last chance to buy it, 105, let's say, this time with a lot more confidence, because that you're exiting a nice consolidation range. And, if the bears were able to stop the market from moving up and they were able to reverse it, but they couldn't take it lower, then typically at points like that, the bears are going to be pretty quiet from that point onwards, at least for, a couple of days, couple of weeks. You're not going to see much. Bears are going to be quiet. They're going to be hiding back in their hole, back in their cave, and you're just not going to hear from them for a little bit, because they had a really good chance to kind of take the market down, significantly lower, but the bulls were stepping in. You're now in price discovery mode. You've never seen any price level above 112, which makes it incredibly easy to set new all-time highs, and I obviously believe that we could end up doing that here as well. So I think, pretty good setup in this market overall. I'm definitely liking what I'm seeing, and I'm definitely thinking that, Bitcoin is standing in a pretty good posture right now. Obviously, this is dependent on, Trump and other things like that, right? Like this definitely doesn't have to go smoothly. This can definitely go wrong. It's gone wrong many times. There could be another kind of conflict brewing in the Middle East, for example, or whatever. And that would totally, have a negative effect on our markets here. So, these things are quite unpredictable in that sense, especially from a political standpoint. But I tell you what, it's good news, right? Apparently, there's a 60-day ceasefire now between the IDF and Gaza, which is, progress, right? I mean, ideally, that means no conflict for 60 days at least, maybe even a longer-lasting peace from here. Who knows? But obviously, at a minimum, that should be good for our markets right here now. So I think that's absolutely great. As we see Bitcoin kind of moving up, and then Bitcoin's dominance moving up with it, and then, altcoins kind of staying where they are. Hey, what's up, Ghost? As you see stuff like that, that's going to really kind of grind down on the kind of psychology of traders in the market. That's going to make them feel really quite upset and frustrated with the state of affairs. And that actually, I think, really contributes toward what we're going for, where a lot of people kind of you know, they just throw in the towel and they're done and they quit and they leave the space, that kind of thing. And obviously, you know, at that point, you know, they're going to have to sell their tokens, and, you know, the only buyers left by definition would have to be incredibly patient buyers. You know, and if you're so patient like that, then, you know, you're probably on the side of history where your coin starts going up. So I think that's going to be an important thing to kind of keep in mind as well as we continue to progress throughout this market cycle here. So really good video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Obviously, like I said, make sure you smash up those likes, subscribe, check the bell, all that good stuff. Pardon me there. Check out our beautiful exchanges linked in the description below if you do want to trade on some of the best platforms in the game. 𝗙𝗟𝗟𝗡 is, you know, on par with Bybit as far as, you know, great liquidity. I mean, obviously Bybit's going to be a lot better, but 𝗙𝗟𝗟𝗡 is still great, and like definitely more than enough for most people. You know, 1-to-1 reserves as well, proven, so you don't have to worry about them pulling an FTX on you. It could still happen, of course, but obviously I think the chances are a lot smaller. But most importantly, really, really nice kind of chart updates and stuff like that we've been posting for you guys in 𝗙𝗟𝗟𝗡, so definitely check all that out if you are interested. Again, only if you're not from a restricted region, though. We really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, you know exactly what to do, and we'll see you all in the next one.